Guys, thank you for taking, or ladies and gentlemen, sorry. Thank you for taking your time this morning to stop in and spend a little bit of an hour with us to talk some about mosquito control. Give me a minute and let me get my screen shared for you, and we'll jump right in here. Hope everybody can see that. If I can get it to launch, there we go. Okay. So let me start off by saying that Mosquito Control Solutions is a little bit misleading and arbitrary. Solutions is a little ambiguous. Go back to what Andy was saying in my bio. Outside of working in the industry for sales and service, my expertise, if you will, is not in active ingredients and chemistries. I sell those, but really my forte, my expertise is in droplet size and spray patterns. Just kind of gravitated to that, not necessarily was pushed there. It's just I think it's essential that we understand our droplet sizes and our spray patterns, and you'll see why we get there, and why I have to say that here in just a second as we get into the presentation. So let me start here with the shameless plug, and it's not working. There we go. Shameless plug. This is me. So we're off patent chemistries. You'll know me by Wisdom. You'll know me by Navigator, Avesta. More specifically, probably know the Nuvan pest strips. You've heard of Orthene, but this is what I do for day to day, day in. So let's talk a little bit about metamorphosis. And in order to really capture the science part of this presentation, you need to understand metamorphosis and what metamorphosis mosquitoes go through. And mosquitoes are a complete metamorphosis insect, and that's important. Why? And you'll see in a second. There's two ways to attack. There's two ways to control. I would never use the word eliminate. Control is, I think, it's a broad term. I don't think necessarily it's in control. You can beat back for toleration, if you will, for a period of time, mosquitoes, but they're with us, will always be with us, and I don't think there's anything short of the end of the world that'll take care of mosquitoes for us. But you got to understand that they are a complete metamorphosis, and here's why. Well, and I'm sorry, good example of complete metamorphosis is the housefly, right? Housefly is just about as common as the mosquito. It goes egg, larva, pupa, and adult. And it's essential to, and necessary to understand as we walk into control, or as we consider control in the mosquito life cycle. So complete metamorphosis. Excuse me just a second, guys. So it's important to know that we mainly target the adult part, or the adult version of the mosquito, and specifically the female. It's the female that requires a blood meal. And, obviously, if you've ever been bitten by a mosquito, it's not necessarily out of spite, it's out of necessity, right? They have to have a blood meal to order to develop eggs. So we don't ever see really the eggs, and I've got a neat little video that'll show this here in a minute. But the eggs are viable. Some would say years. I don't know necessarily if it's indefinite, but they're viable for quite a long period of time. And the reason you'll see this is after a big rain or after a flood. We always have this outbreak, from a week to 3 days to a week after the flooding event. You have that because the eggs become viable and start turning into going through their larval stage, um, as they get wet or as they contact water. But what we don't spend a lot of time with is the larva stage, and the larva stage is there's control that can be provided for your customers. There's control that can be, or there's products that can be used that will help break this larva stage, which will actually obviously control your adult population. So mosquito biology, we talked about the eggs, but the eggs, you know, it really begins there with the eggs. It can take, you know, a few days to several months after those eggs are laid. So in a dry season, you know, you have the adult female, she's fed on her host, either you, your animal, or whatever it may be. She lays her eggs. And if they're not in contact with the water, or if there's in a drought season, they're not going to hatch until they come in contact with water. So water is essential in order for the mosquito life cycle either to be broken or for it to continue. You have the larva, and there's 4 different larva stage. They actually molt. There's also, in this stage, there's a lot of predation that happens. So if we, you know, if we didn't have the, you know, the invertebrates, or, you know, some of the fish that feed on the larva, just imagine just how bad the you know, the adult population of mosquitoes would be. But these will be found. The larva is found, you know, in casual water. So let's talk about in and around businesses or home. You know, you've got drainage, you've got pooling, you've got stagnant water, but you've also got overgrowth. Any place that can hold moisture, I'm going to show you some pictures of those in a minute. You need to be concentrating on where this larva. So the larva is going to be not necessarily in the streams or in the lakes or in the swamps of Florida, or again here in North Carolina where I'm at today. That's not necessarily where you'll find the larva. You find them in and around the homes of businesses, and you have to address that. It's got to be addressed in your solution. But so we go to pupa, and after pupa, 2 to 3 days, it comes the adult. As soon as the adult hatches, she's looking for a blood meal. The males are unimportant as a control at this point in time, because this is the one, the female is the one that we're targeting in our controls. All right, so let's take a look at this video real quick, and you'll see that this is not done by me. This is Steve Dower, and I found this on YouTube several years ago. It's a great look at some of the things that we never get to see in general as we're looking at mosquitoes. So it's 4 minutes long. Take a look at it, then we'll jump back in. All right. So guys, it's important to understand. Hopefully, I'm sorry, let me back up about the video. I've never seen that type of life cycle, and it's in a, or that close up of life cycle of the mosquito. And it's kind of important for me to understand at least, what the enemy is, if you will, how they come about, and where they come from. So, if you've ever had a breakdown in your um, in your mosquito work where you're getting complaints that you were out there, you were just out there yesterday, customers calling, whether it's residential or commercial, they're logging complaints. You're going back and forth. You just can't seem to beat back the horde, if you will. If you're not paying attention to the casual water spots, the standing water where mosquitoes are breeding, the from water inside the nook of a tree, to also the water inside of your plants and your ornamentals. All of these hold water. Now that your swimming pool may not look like that in your backyard, but your neighbors 3 houses over may, right? And then that's a whole nother situation that you got to deal with on, trying to either, make a treatment into that casual water, or what are you going to do? You have to ask yourself those questions. The first thing that we should do with all of our mosquito control ventures is we need to inspect, and we need to start treating harborages. If you're not doing that, you are putting yourself at a huge disadvantage of not dealing with the casual water that's in and around the properties. I get it. We all love our big, sexy, loud machines. We love to just get out there and start making noise and applying insecticides. But I would encourage you to take a look at where the mosquitoes could possibly be breeding in and around the property before you start insecticides. One of the great control things that we have is Summit, which there's others out there that we compete against, but Summit is our larvicide. If you'll, it's a simple drop in, if you will. It comes in 6 packs or I'm sorry, 12 pack or boxes. You can even put that there's a hole in it for a reason. We put some of these guys put them on reeds in swamps, and they float up and down on that natural stem. But they're used to treat the water for larvae. They do not harm the other aquatic animals. They're specifically dialed into mosquitoes, and they'll break that larva chain inside of the mosquito's life cycle. Here's some ideas. Excuse me. Here's some ideas that I came up with that will help with larvicides. And take a look at number 2. So if there's a big rain event coming, or we know on annual events that that certain areas will be flooded, you can put these out. They won't decay, and they won't be rendered useless before the flood happens. So you can actually put those out to help control a tremendous amount of the larva that you're going to be dealing with after a flood issue. Also, look, something we don't think about, or in evaporative coolers. A large amount of the commercial buildings use evaporative coolers to cool their space. A lot of standing water around that on commercial accounts, but something to think about. All right. Why do we need to control mosquitoes other than the nuisance itch? Guys, here's what they do. We all know they vector diseases. List on the left are some of the known common viruses that they can vector, from person to person. They can pick it up, bring it to us through the exchange of their saliva into our bloodstream. And then, I don't know if you've ever dealt with dog heartworm. It's a common issue these days that can be, treated against. But If you ever had an animal that's had heartworms, it's pretty ugly. But that comes from, if you didn't know that, that comes from the mosquito. And now malaria. Malaria here in the United States, it's becoming a real thing, and people are reporting that there's locally originated malaria, which means it's not coming in from some other country. It's here, and it's starting to pop up quite a bit in any place where there's mosquitoes. One thing to also take away from this slide is that there's two types of mosquitoes. There's Aedes and there's Culex. Aedes, I won't get in, I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to get into the identity of them. But if you're being bit during the day, in the morning, the day, most of the time, that's going to be your Aedes species. It's not important to control on both of these is the same, but then you got Culex, which is dust. So you can bet that you're not going to do anything to eliminate. You can only control. But I don't know, good sales material for you as you're talking to your clients of which species is biting you. All right, so now we're going to get into droplet patterns and spray size and spray patterns. Sorry, droplet size and spray patterns. This is not an indictment. What I say is my opinion. I am not complaining. I'm critiquing. I'm not complaining or criticizing our primary way of controlling mosquitoes, but the primary way is the backpack, which has a pretty powerful airstream, 300 miles per hour plus there at the nozzle, and then we're dropping a product stream into that air and using it to create droplets and to move our product in and around properties. So I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying droplet pattern, droplet size and spray pattern matter in all of our insect control, but especially when we're trying to control mosquitoes. So the reason why this is, these pictures are on here as it talks about adult harborage is that your mosquitoes are going to be found, your adult female mosquitoes are going to be found during the heat of the day on the backside of all these leaves. So if you are using your machines, if you will, and I'll use that term, to wet down the surface or to put product on the surface of any of this foliage, it has to be on the underside. That's where the mosquitoes are found. If you're not putting it, if you're not allowing or making a way of pushing that airstream into this foliage, you're not getting the proper coverage, and you're not putting insecticide, or you're not putting your product where the mosquito is going to be found, and that's on the other underside of those leaves. And one thing to note, guys, is the primary mode of pesticide application hasn't changed in 70 years. We still rely extensively on droplet size and spray patterns and flow and pressure. So we have machines that make flow and pressure, but flow and pressure is in use to create a spray pattern and droplet size. I'm going to leave that, just quit kicking that horse, but you've got to work your product into the backside of those leaves, and not just the ones that you can see. It's got to be, the mosquito, it could be 2 or 3 feet inside of that stand of organic material. If you're not getting your product in there, you're wasting your time, basically. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the basics of insecticide application as it concerns to, in professional pest control. Again, how we do it hasn't changed in 70 years. And we spray an application to create a surface residual, and then we wait for the insect to come in contact with what we laid down, or that's called dose transfer, and it creates control. Now we can put down the best spray pattern and we can use the best droplet size, but if our insect never comes in contact with where we made the application, we will never get control. So most of your callbacks are based upon um, our spray, our residual left on treated surfaces. And again, it's not a complaint. It's a critique. Think about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and put some thought into it instead of just walking around the property, if that's what you're doing. All right. So what is droplets? It's important to understand that different machines have different orifices and use different methods to create different droplet size. The B&G, which we're all familiar with, and the cockroach is synonymous with the industry. And I'll use the word bioassay. And bioassay is when you take a live specimen and you apply your active ingredients to it. So the German cockroach is the bioassay of the pest control industry, especially for indoor structural work. But the B&G creates a 225 to a 175, if you will, droplet pattern. It just cannot create a micron smaller than 275. It's 175, 275, and we'll get into a little bit more science in that. So it's not a great tool for it's really not a great tool for cockroach control because it creates too big of a droplet, but certainly not for mosquito control. Backpacks, that's not the steel type backpack. That is the under pressure, liquid under pressure backpack. It's going to create somewhere between 160 to 300 micron. Then we get into the ULV cold fog, and I use that machine instead of putting in the backpack, because the backpack is a good representation of that machine that creates a ULV cold fog. That's what it's trying to do, is mimic what that ULV cold fogger will do. And it's getting close. It's getting close. Some of its droplets are 20, some of its droplets are 150, and you need to be in the 25 micron. You really have to be in the 25 micron or smaller to kill adults. If you're creating a wet mist with bigger droplets than 25 to 5 micron, you're not killing adults. They won't come in contact with it in the air. It's not something that they can fly through, pick up. So just understand that I'm not saying that the backpack's ineffective, just saying it could be more efficient. All right, so a little science between what are droplets. It's measured in the science community as VMD, which is volume median diameter. What does that mean? That means that the way that nozzles work, 100% of the droplets that it creates is not, if it's rated to make a 180 micron droplet size, 100% of those are not 180 micron. Basically, your spray patterns are about 10%. Your spray pattern is about 10% of that 180. So 10% of your spray is 180, 45% is smaller, 45% is larger. So, and basically maybe in the middle of the spray pattern, you'll get what the nozzle is supposed to produce. That's with all nozzles, ag, irrigation. That's just the way that nozzles are designed. They're based upon VMD. All right. So instead of looking at that as a cold fogger, look at that as your backpack. And so, you're walking in the yard or you're making your application throughout the foliage or let's just use the word property. Your heavy droplets, the big droplets start falling out at around 4 feet, especially your big ones. And that's wet. That's water active paper. That's pictures of the water activated paper at those particular feet using that machine. And you can see at 3 foot, you're wet, and that's where your big droplets are landing. 8 feet, you still have a tremendous amount of product dropping out on you, which means that those droplets are too big for mosquito control. 20 feet is where you're finding that, call it 100 to 25, if you will, droplets. So you need standoff. You don't need to be up against the foliage. You've got to have some standoff in order to create the correct droplet size. But then that comes in, how do I then, Greg, if that's the case, then how do I get those droplets? How do I get those droplets to the backside of the leaves in order for my product to be effective or to be available for that resting mosquito? Good question. And I'm not sure that I can solve it, but there's also that quaking effect that once you start on foliage, it starts moving, it starts quaking, starts shifting. That's really when you're starting to distribute that product properly, is when you can see that your foliage is quaking and moving, and your droplets are able to reach into and get behind and on the underside of those leaves. So whether they're resting there or whether you're fighting them in the air, that you need some standoff. You need to be able to ensure that the proper droplet sizes are being dispersed where they need to be. Right. So also, guys, there's this thing that we're really not aware of, or we really don't think about, is that the impact of those of those droplets. So we're making that application, and because of the force and the velocity and the weight and the size of those drops, they don't just stay necessarily where we want them to, right? They can and will bounce, and that's why we use stuff. And some people do, maybe not everybody, but some applicators will use a surfactant, which is soap, and they use it as a sticker. It's called sticker. Matter of fact, there's a product called sticker that reduces this bounce and this shear on your foliage and allows the product to adhere based on, not a mechanical adhesion, but a way of making sure that our product stays where we put it. Basically what it is. If you're not using a surfactant or the sticker product, you might take a look at it. It could be very advantageous for you. All right, talk about outdoors. There is this thing called chemical trespass, and we have not really, as an industry, in the state of Texas, not necessarily have we dealt with a chemical trespass issue. I got more to say about that as it applies as we go further into the presentation. But just think about outdoors, the wind currents, air. You're getting that. If you don't have proper standoff, you're getting that back on your hands, legs, arms, shoes. You're carrying that with you back to the truck inside the customer's home. Understand that it goes everywhere, but hard surfaces, it is bouncing back on you and you're getting it on yourself. Indoors, a great example of this is, if I'm making a preventative, or, I'm shooting a baseboard, if you will, be aware that it's getting on your pants. Heaven forbid you're doing it in shorts. But that this product is not, your spray pattern is drifting back, it's bouncing back onto you. Please make sure also you're not wearing tennis shoes when you're making application. You need a hard surface, non-porous shoe. Proper PPE is essential. So just pay attention to that stuff. And also, if it's on your pants, and if you're not using a commercial laundry service, if you don't have a uniform service, if you're washing these in the family washing machine, you're bringing that stuff home for everybody to participate with in the house. So, all right, so let's get into droplet residue contact. the micro encapsulated contact, and some treated surfaces. All right, so here's what we're doing when we make a spray. We spray our droplet. We are waiting for that droplet to dry. Okay, so it's not the liquid, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen. It's not the liquid that is doing the work. It's what's in that liquid, and we have to allow that liquid to dry in order to expose 100% of the active ingredient. So we put down droplets, and those droplets dry, but inside that droplet is the active ingredient. So once it dries is when it becomes effective. Now that's also when it becomes available for photo degradation, the environment, everything else to break it down, right? The water, the carrier, if you will, what it's mixed with is kind of protects it and allows it to disperse. But once it evaporates, that's when it's available for the insect. And again, the cockroach is a good representation of our industry. So how does it work? How does this droplet residual work? So once it's dry and the insect, and think of that also as a mosquito, because it's going to work the same way on the mosquito. It's not necessarily penetrating that ectoskeleton. What is penetrating is these tarsal pads that allow them to hang on to stuff. So that's a softer surfaces, hang on to surfaces, upside down, sideways. It's amazing how they can crawl on a roof or up a wall. It's these tarsal pads that allow them to do it. And so when they walk across, mosquito included, when they walk across your treated surface or that residual, they're picking it up on their tarsal pads. So if you look over to the black and white, you'll see those little white specks. That is the active ingredient that's been picked up on those tarsal pads. And it's not while they're cleaning them, they clean themselves. It's when that active ingredient will penetrate that tarsal pad and become in the blood of the cockroach. And also an insect, another thing to think about is these insects, they don't necessarily have a circulatory system. So it's just a big pool of liquid inside of the insect. So once you get it in there, once you've worked it through their tarsal pads, you really have poisoned the insect. So micro encaps, these are the newest formulations that we have. A lot of nice new active ingredient, but the micro encaps is the protective wall that is engineered. I'm not sure necessarily how it's made, but it's a synthetic man-made material that is that's around that active ingredient. And it's designed to allow it to persist longer in any particular environment. So the micro encapsulates it in the water dries, and you're left with this micro encapsulated product. Basically, the micro encapsulation has to be broken in order for the active ingredient to be available to the insect. So what you're seeing there in that those two pictures, the black and white on top, that's the micro encapsulated on the surface. But you also on the bottom one where it says residue of active ingredient, that's the broken micro encapsulate the broken micro capsule, and you got a 20 micron dose inside of that. That's a very interesting picture of how that works. This is important to understand. Thermal fog is the preferred way of killing adult mosquitoes because its vene medium diameter is 5 to 25, and 5 to 25 microns is the desirable way of killing adults. It is, if you get it on it or if it flies through it, it is you will get more mortality through thermal fogging than you will any other type of spray pattern or any type of droplet size. Now, also understand that it's fog and it floats. It's smoke. It's created through thermal, right? But it floats on air currents. So you've got to be very, very cognizant of where this product goes, because I'm telling you, if you hadn't seen it yet, it is coming. Chemical trespass will become a thing. A problem that we need to deal with. I shouldn't say necessarily a problem. We want the product to be, we want to be able to be in control of where we apply our products. All right. So, and the reason why is because outside air current, those fogs will travel more than 12 feet. Most of the backpack products or devices that we use will travel more than 12 feet. You can get those to move pretty, downstream, especially downwind. You can get those to move, 20, 30 feet. Just be aware that if you're fogging it or you're applying into the wind, or you're applying downwind, or you're applying crosswind, you've got to be aware so that you're moving this product properly. All right. So droplet drift, I'm going to get back into the 50015, and everybody's probably got one of those on their truck. That's the B&G nozzle. And it produces a 220 micron droplet size. This is just to give you an illustration that the smaller the droplet size, the less it's going to bounce and fragment. So just be aware of what your equipment will do. If you need help with that, get a hold of your equipment supplier. There are charts and graphs that are made by the suppliers that will give you the droplet size of all of the tips and nozzles that you're using in the industry. You have those available. Teach your people, or educate yourself on what that nozzle will do, and don't hesitate to change them in and out based upon based upon what insect you're targeting. So residuals on treated surfaces. That first one is unpainted wood. Notice the peaks and valleys that you have to deal with in order for a residual to be effective. Painted wood, it may look nice and smooth and pretty to you and me, but to an insect, that's what the insect's seeing. That's what the insect's dealing with. Concrete, if you're making applications on concrete, good luck, because that's a porous material. It will absorb quicker than about anything. Well, dry wood will too, but at least dry wood, some of your residual remains. It's tough to control insects with a liquid formulation on concrete. It's almost like the surface of the moon or Mars, if you will, and it pulls it in so tight that not a lot of insects can come in contact with the residual. They can walk right over it. All right, so spraying to create a droplet residue on a surface is that's what we're taught to do. For some reason, we quantitate, or we associate spraying insecticide as the primary thing, or the primary mode of action of what we do in our industry. And I would really encourage you to rethink that. It's not we don't get paid to apply an amount of active ingredient. We get paid to use what's in our head. And whether you've been self-taught, whether you use Malice, whether you use Purdue, whether you use whatever other educational system or book, we're learning about the biology and the habitats of insects, and then we just go out and treat a surface, and it doesn't correlate. Use your heads. think about what you're targeting and why you're doing that. And yes, residue or is a residual is important, but it's not everything that we do. We're really not getting paid for that. And also in mosquito control, the mosquito is on the backside of that leaf, and very rarely is it moving or walking around. If it's not disturbed, it's not walking, it's flying, right? So if it gets threatened or if it needs to move, it doesn't walk, it flies. So did it pick up a proper dose? Was the dose transferred to that mosquito, even though I've got the proper droplet size on the backside of that leaf? Did it come in contact with enough of those in order to kill it? It's hard to say, but what we do know is that if it's the proper droplet size on the surface with the German cockroach, he's got to move 22 inches in order for him to pick up a lethal dose of insecticide. So again, if I'm making a commercial kitchen and I'm applying a strip of residual, if that cockroach never comes in contact with it, or he only walks 3 feet or 3 inches across it, he's not picking up. She is not picking up a lethal dose. So again, it's not all about applying insecticides. It's 99% of using our heads. All right. So microencapsulations are really they're not new, but there are the newer microencaps stand up against those peaks and valleys. If you flash back to the concrete, or if you flash back to painted wood or unpainted wood, microencapsulations tend to stay more viable longer, but they're also more available to the insect or into the mosquito to come in contact with. Dose transfer. I'm beating a dead horse here, but I want to show you that your mortality rate on the housefly, your mortality rate on the mosquito, if you're not into that 30 micron, 25, 30 micron, so that graph up top next to the dead fly, that's your mortality rate. You're not going to get 100% mortality out of, population of flies, population of mosquitoes. You can't do it, but you're going to have closer to that 100, if you will, if you're in the proper droplet size. So the bigger the droplet size becomes, so go down the scale, where 80, 90, your mortality rate just drops off the roof. So that's why aerosols are more effective than B&Gs when you are applying for flying insects. Aerosols create a smaller droplet size. Something to think of, something to really encourage, or some of the things that are out there for us to use, or for your homeowners to use, are the predation against larvae. There's mosquito fish specifically that, they're specific. All they do is feed on mosquito larvae. And then there's other insects that predate on mosquito larvae. So that's when, we start knocking them down with some of our non-target applications that drift. A lot of the products that we use are pyrethrin based. And you know what pyrethrin does to invertebrates and what it'll do to fish. So, if you float a fog over a lake or a pond, or some casual water that's holding fish or invertebrates, you're gonna kill them pretty quick. All right, so how to defend against mosquitoes. This is a kind of a public service announcement. This is the last slide, if you will, too. And I would encourage, this is public information. This is not proprietary. I'll send it to you. It's great to leave behind for your customers to help you help them. You went outside, use a repellent. There's natural based and repellents, and then there's the DEET based repellents, and then whichever one works or whichever one defend. But to go outside knowing that it's high mosquito season and get bit, but you're not putting something on to help against that to repel the mosquito is a little maddening. Light, dress light, put on, don't be, you cover up those white legs, cover up your arms, use lightweight materials, get rid of standing water. Teach your customers to look for and to get rid of standing water. Turn over the bird baths, empty the buckets, pick up the tires, whatever it has to help you, or if not, charge them for it. Do that, charge them for it. And then be aware that, again, to go back to the Kulex and the AGs, mosquito outside at dusk and dawn might want to hold off, especially during mosquito season.